I am so stoked for our governance panel. We have assembled, like, oh my gosh, the dream team. You might not be able to tell, but I'm jumping up and down, so excited for this panel because we've got some amazing people on. So I'm going to stop talking. And this panel is comprised of Paul Banoub, Mark Kernke, Kris Curtis, and Fee Gordon, who, special shout out to Fee because it is like 1 a.m.-ish her time. So Fee, you're a rock star. Thank you so much. It's also, the panel's moderated by Cesar. So without further ado, I'll just turn it right over to Cesar. Thank you guys so much.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the very first Data Governance Guru panel. And it's my pleasure to announce, and yes, hearts to everyone from Paul, announce the panelists here on TFF. We're really excited. Today we've got Paul Banoub and Kris Curtis, Fee Gordon, and Mark Kernke. And this is an all-star panel. If you've not met these folks at conferences or heard them speak, they were brilliant and fascinating. And something that we were talking about when we were organizing TFF was, putting this panel together and who could we bring in that would really be a good conversation and keep this going. And data governance in itself it's a topic where very few people get excited about. It's a topic where a lot of people will actually probably miss that meeting or go hide or call in sick that day because it's a tough one. It's so encompassing. It's so new, so it's very hard to find a true definition of it. But I do want to go through and introduce our panelists and bring them on board. We're very happy to have everyone. So let me stop sharing my slide here so we can see all our panelists. Hey guys, if you haven't turned on video and haven't unmuted, go ahead and unmute now.
Hi.
Good morning here, and good afternoon, and good evening in certain places too.
You'll be right, Fee.
Yeah. Hot now.
I'm extremely happy to have everybody here, and we're talking about a topic that's just it's such a difficult one. It's so encompassing. I know I reached out to Mark early on and talked about this, and he's like, oh my gosh, we could talk for days about this. We could just go on and on.
And then you put me against these guys and like, we're not going to leave here before sort of Friday next week.
Hold on a minute. Cesar, you were just saying how boring data governance is, and in the next sentence, Mark wants to bang on about it all day. I mean, is that
You're saying that I'm boring?
Very true. Well, we've got just a quick list of questions we can go through here, and really what we'll do is we'll watch our folks too. If anyone has anything to raise your hand.
Sorry to interrupt. I've just got a bit of feedback coming through from someone's mic. I don't know if someone's heavy breathing or deep breathing or having a good time behind the scenes with their video shut off. But maybe you could just take the mic away a little bit. That'd be great. Thank you.
Well, so let me start off with everybody's opinion here. And really, go ahead, feel free to jump in on this one. But what's the stance on formalized data governance and policies? And should organizations have these? I've talked to a lot of people who think they shouldn't have these, which kind of in a own way is kind of like a very anarchistic view of data governance, but it's still kind of a model as well. So the question is, thanks. And the question really is, what should and does this look like in your opinion? And I also want to preface this also by saying, these are really just opinions. No one here is talking about their organizations, the companies they work with or worked for in the past. It's just what you've seen in the past and kind of what might work, what might not work. So I'll throw it to the panelists and see who's ready to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I can start off with saying I've been in places that have been really well governed and those that have been really ungoverned. And although it's easy to get things done in an ungoverned world, it means that everyone has a different story. works. I've seen it work all right in smaller companies where you have implicit governance, because you have a small amount of people that can look over everything, and it's able to be done. But when you grow to the companies that we all work for, then things get tricky. And I've definitely had interesting conversations with each and every one of the other panelists. And my organization is very different in its in the way that everything functions in the organizational structure, than a lot of the similarities that I see with others. And that's been the biggest eye-opener to me, is that it depends on the people, the level that they are, and the support that they have for making sure that things are unified, or whether you're decentralized, and you need to have implicit rules, that you need to have the rules written down rather than them just being implicit within your organization.
Hey, Mark, can you just do a quick intro into who you are?
Oh, okay. So I'm technically not meant to be talking on behalf of my company today, but you can look on my LinkedIn and you would see that I am the head of data visualization for Groupon. And so it's an interesting company that's just turned 10 years old, and we grew very, very quickly, and so have our data systems.
Cool.
I think.
Sorry.
No, you go, Fee.
Cool. I'll just jump in quickly and say, hey, I'm Fee. I am the BI Strategist Director for JLL. So I'm another one of the Tableau community that get the pleasure of working at JLL. And I've been working in data for around 20 years. So I've been around the block. I've certainly worked in organisations that have more mild on the data governance scale. Now, I think that most organisations, they have the IT functions in place and they're doing a lot of different things. But I've also seen more recently that there has been this sort of movement to having stronger governance. I think what happened originally was there was IT who have their stronger governance processes, and then we started to see what bubbled up with the likes of Tableau, business users really starting to create their own data, looking after it, maintaining it, and perhaps they didn't have the same processes, robust processes in place to ensure that the end-to-end process was governed. And what that meant was they could go and run really hard and fast, and in some instances ended up being in the wild, wild west. And in some instances, I would say that they weren't so much. So perhaps a little bit different to what Mark was saying there. Whether or not data governance is important in an organisation, well, for the organisations that I talked to, data is underpinning most strategies within organisations. You know, we're going through the fourth industrial revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution at the moment, and part of that is the digitisation and the digital transformation, and that includes data as well. And we are all drinking from the fire hose when it comes from data. And what I am seeing is that more and more organisations are starting to put these governance policies in place to support that.
Just to add on that, Fee. So I'm Kris Curtis. I'm based in London, and I'm the product owner of data visualization within Just Eat. I think personally, just in my opinion, that there should be formalized sort of governance in place. It's very sort of I don't think it's a black and white sort of answer. I think it's a gray area. And I think for me, it's very much around the journey of the business, how far they're advanced down their data journey, or even in their sort of how sort of mature the organization is. And I think it almost like needs to be treated like your hardware. When you scale, when you grow, you start putting that additional support mechanisms in place. And I think data governance feels like it should be an add-on in terms of that. I think for me, it's important to make sure that everyone's on the same road. You know, everyone's going down the same path, and that's where I think a data governance framework makes sure that everyone sort of follows that same path. Paul, I'm making Paul laugh. Am I stealing your words, Paul? Or you completely
No. It was that comment from Fee has just made me laugh. I can see I'm getting slaughtered. I haven't even opened my mouth yet. But yes, I do feel a bit outnumbered with the Aussie and Kiwi accents on the call, but I'll give it my best shot. So I'm Paul. I manage a Tableau Centre of Excellence at UBS Investment Bank based in London, looking after a lot of lovely Tableau users. And I think the data governance piece is something I encounter every day as a big challenge. I will definitely agree with Mark's comment about size in that I think not having a governance policy works very well and quite okay up to a certain point, and then things start to fall apart. And I don't think it's a technical problem. I think it's more that as you increase in size, communication starts to be difficult. And I think communication has to be absolutely robust for data governance to be successful. And I think the larger an organization gets, the more it struggles with size. And then you have a spiraling, things just spiral out of control, because once you lose governance, then you lose data quality. And if you lose data quality, people stop trusting the data. And once people don't trust the data, nothing works. So that's a common issue that I see.
Excellent, Paul. Excellent point, Paul. It's interesting to me how data governance can be, well, in certain cases it can be really helpful for communication too. But I've also seen the other end of it too, where data starts getting locked down to the point where even data that should be open to an entire company doesn't get open. Actually, I was speaking to someone as a user group last night, and they were telling me at their company, they pretty much have to subscribe to their own data set and pay the subscription fee to get access to the data set that their own company creates, just because the constraints of data governance. And I just sat there, kind of scratching my head at that one. But it's kind of interesting. I've kind of thought about, just the models themselves. And I want to ask the panel, what are the models that you've seen that work well? I think there's a lot I've seen that don't work very well. But what works well? What's kind of the direction we should go in?
I love it how there's actually names for data governance sort of models. Who comes up with these things? I know, I don't know the full range of models, but we try to implement almost like an asset register, where everything kind of all sort of our different sort of tables and databases and all that kind of stuff is mapped back to a central repository. And we do have a very, very small team that kind of sort of help I'd say keep that kind of documented. But I mean, it's a very sort of early days for us in terms of that, and it is a very sort of a bit of a learning curve. So I'm equally as I can sort of give input and sort of advice on here, but I'm equally as open to sort of hearing what the other guys are doing and what sort of other people have different ideas. So.
I think that data cataloging, the data dictionary sort of stuff is definitely the first step that everyone takes, because it's the really obvious one of people. The database grows to a level where people don't know where to go and what different metrics actually mean. But as we are looking and embarking on this, we are engaging with the rest of software development, because they go through other similar governance that we do. They have gating processes for their software to get into production, and we're looking at ways of making sure that our analytics follows a similar route. Now, it's going to be slightly different in to make sure that it fits the right checks and balances that we're trying to do, but it's the same. It's quality assurance that it functions the way that we expect, and that it's always going to be up and reliable, and that it's going to be timely for being able to look at it. And that's exactly what you expect out of a website for the big tech companies, or from a bank, or different elements. It's trying to leverage the other processes that we have in the business and bring it in. And this is meaning that when we're thinking about data cataloging, we're thinking about things like the API endpoints that we have for all the microservices that our software developers build, so that everything has consistency in the way that we name, in the way that we can look up where to get data from, It's just that one is a table and one's a data stream.
So you say data cataloging there, Mark. That's really interesting, and I think I've seen some effective data catalogs, but usually it's a situation where it's a data catalog for business data that doesn't include IT data, or the other way around. I've never actually seen a data catalog where it's a true one-stop shop and you can go and pick from a menu of firm-wide data that includes technology, business, whatever. It's always the two, or I've seen two different data catalogs on different systems, but there's never this intermingling of a true homogeneous data catalog.
Yeah.
Well, sorry. There you go, Mark.
I don't think that it really exists today. I haven't really seen any products out there on the market to make it happen. But working in tech companies, we have a lot of software developers that can help out and take the best ideas and make it work for our internal systems so that we can move faster. I have that luxury.
So I had the pleasure of delivering a data cataloging solution, and unfortunately, just as it was being delivered, I walked away from the organisation and have walked into another organisation now, and have recently been trying. My role is to set the strategy for APAC, and recently, in the last few weeks, I've gone out to our stakeholders now, whether they be technical stakeholders or operational stakeholders, so coming from the business. And I went out and did a couple of surveys. First off, they had to do an introduce yourself survey, whereby they had to rate their data skills. They had to tell me their top 3 likes and their top 3 pain points that they were experiencing, and a few other details as well. And in addition to that, across the period of 5 days, they had to record any scenario by which they were using data and talk about whether or not they got the data, why they were using the data, how they were using it, where they got it from, and a whole bunch of other things. If they didn't get the data, if they did get the data, what value or action they were creating out of it, a bunch of questions. And it's been a while since I've been able to get on the tools, but I sat in Tableau for a few days and went through all of their different responses. And the top issue that was coming out was it's hard to find data in reports. It's taking too long to collate information. And I'm unsure of all the different reports. Now, this comes back to this same topic around, how do we enable our end users? So maybe the solution is social data cataloging. Certainly the solution that I was rolling out in my previous role at CBA was the Ultrix data cataloging solution, Connect. And what that does is it goes out and it scrapes through all of the metadata behind your SQL environments or your database environments or your Tableau environments, anything that's scheduled up on the Ultrix server as well. Get a little bit more information in there, get some lineage as well, and bringing it all together in one place. Now, I know that where the product was at, you had to sort of know, am I going to go and search in database, or am I going to go and search in Tableau in different areas? But the view is that you eventually will be able to cross-search, across those different instances. And the beauty of that is an end user can just log on, Google-like search, and up will come all of the visualizations that are there already. It will go through all the curated data sources, and then it will also go back through into the data warehouse as well. It's pretty light touch. So there's 2 ways that you can start to have a look at what is actually applicable. So people can upvote and downvote, which is, that's the kind of thing around data governance is you want people to be spending, you want some people to be spending a decent amount of time, but if we can crowdsource and we can identify what's really important and do it in a way that's really simple and it's not going to take too much effort, we can upvote. It's pretty simple. We all like stuff on Facebook, right? We all talk about things, or maybe we don't anymore. Actually, Facebook might be a bit of a bad example. But the other thing that you can do in the solution is you can also certify things. So there's those 2 kind of levels. If it was coming from either the IT team or the business team that are the BI team, and they know that they're going through everything, it's gone through the QA process, then you can certify it. Otherwise, you can rely on that upvote along the way. So I think that's definitely one way that you can do or enable people to understand where data is and give them an opportunity to get there faster. I just want to touch a little bit to the right of this conversation, which is in another way to approach governance, which I've seen most recently. Now, most organisations like to talk governance, but they don't actually put their money where their mouth is and hire roles specifically. I've only been at JLL for 6 weeks, so I'm still getting to understand the business, but this is the first organisation that I've worked in that there's actually data quality dashboards. We are measuring how our systems, how one disparate system is matching to another disparate system and where the differences are. And there are people that need to go through and actually change what's happening with that data. So update it, make sure that the systems end up matching. Because what happens when things don't match is actually beyond bad reporting, other things can happen. Work orders could fall over, they might not get delivered. There's a bunch of things that we need to make sure that we're delivering for our stakeholders. And so we have people that are completely assigned into data governance, and it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, it's a really good point, that Fia. That one of my sister teams that works alongside me is a data quality team, and they utilize Alteryx, they utilize Tableau, and there are many data quality dashboards that go out, and they go to very senior people, and the penalties for not addressing the breaches that come up on those dashboards are quite severe. So it's taken a lot of focus and a lot of investment in the tools to try and clean up this data. But even so, even with the progress, we're still a long way off where we want to be, I would.
I don't know if you saw me taking note there, but I had to take a quick note of the data quality teams, because it's something that's really it's prevalent when it comes to just data itself. I think it's kind of the idea and the concept behind data governance is to really make sure that their analysts can trust their data. And this is actually probably one of the big questions that I get from analysts when talking candidly is, it's like, well, how do I know I can trust this data? I spend a lot of time just building my own internal trust with the data set. And I think that's an excellent one there that'll definitely help organizations. What do people feel about certified data sets? It's a concept that's coming up. I know Tableau is starting to add badges, and I wanted to throw that question out to the group and see what people's thoughts are on that.
I've got an opinion on certified data sources in Tableau. I think certification of data sources is really important in every tool, but I think the Tableau implementation of that feature has got a little way to go, because what we want to do is devolve the responsibility of certifying a data set to a central team, to somebody else. But in Tableau, I believe it's only the admins or the owner of the data that can certify it. So what you end up with is, instead of 5,000 published data sources, you end up with 5,000 certified published data sources, because everyone self-certifies. So I think until the functionality evolves a little bit to devolve that responsibility to a centralized team or somebody else, then it'll lose its effectiveness.
100% with Paul on that one. I think one of the biggest issues that I face is the proliferation of data sources all connected to one sort of workbook. And then, luckily we haven't gone down the whole certifying data sources as yet, but it's only a matter of time before the users discover that they can actually certify. And I'd love for a function to be able to, or a feature request actually to be put in where someone has the publishing permissions, they can publish a workbook, but we really sort of restrict. And we're not trying to cut off people from having the ability. I never want to sort of stop people, remove that sort of empowerment of the whole Tableau product and all that kind of stuff, but at least start putting a little bit of governance in place in terms of who within our organization has the ability to publish a data source and make it, is it that centralized team where we have them verifying those data sources, making sure that they're 100% QA'd and checked, and then they're published onto the server, and then they're certified, and then all the users can benefit from that. I
think Mark's mouth is kind of watering at what you're saying there, Kris.
Oh no, there's a whole lot more that's coming on top of that that I'd love to see. Like, really, when we're looking at it, the new roles in the server are completely missing data stewards. Like that's exactly what we're saying here. There isn't that thought in the product just yet. I know that they're touching into this space and trying to get it right. But no matter what, with certification like this, there needs to be the right processes around it. This is just a final product to say that it's in good shape, so that there can be an element of trust. But just having that functionality alone is not enough. It's a matter that what we all need to do as the team that owns the data and owns the system and the reliability is make sure that we have the right processes to check through and make sure that this data is actually correct, is saying what it needs to. And it's a process problem rather than necessarily a product itself. It won't do it by itself.
Do you think this is where Tableau becomes, where you see the shift from like a smaller SME kind of thing to being used obviously in a larger organization where we kind of need these kind of these features in place, right? And put these checks in place?
So I continuously look at what happens in the software development area. There is no tools there to do it. It's all process driven, but normally these teams have a checklist that they go through, and there's standards of what's expected in the industry and the different kinds of testing that they can do to make it work. They have what's known as a software development lifecycle, SDLC, you might hear it be called. And normally that goes through a scoping phase, a functional requirements, which you can then develop what are the functional tests that you want to do at the end of the product. Then a development phase, agile rollout and testing to make sure that it functions as expected. There's unit tests within it to make sure that quality of specific elements are there. Before then, the final functional tests are required before it goes into a production system. And normally in that development as well, there's documentation that they need to do as a gating step at the end to make sure that anything that's going into a production system has the right documentation for anyone to diagnose issues as they arise. It has the right alerting in place to let people know that there are issues when data is updated underneath. There's a whole lot of concepts here, and all of these systems normally help in modern software development. There's CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration and continuous development. People can push code as soon as it's ready into a production environment because the tests are always sitting there and were checked the last time. And that's normally done by a separate team, the product managers, in a lot of cases, that know what they're looking for, where the person that's building it knows what to check in some other cases. And together they get a well-rounded set of tests. Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
Hey, Mark, I think you need to just drop off for a minute and go and log something on the community forum so that we get those those data steward permissions. I know that you did some stuff on extensions while we were at the server admin in New Orleans. Would you mind just popping off for a moment and sorting that out for us?
Sure.
I love these ideas. It's really fantastic to see. I know, Mark, you mentioned data stewards, and it's funny because in prior organizations, I've seen people run away from the position data steward. I've also seen it where actually one of my colleagues who we shared an office, I remember looking through the data catalog and just going, "Oh, hey, you own this data set," and it was a complete surprise to them that they were named the data steward, pretty much because the previous data steward had left and it just had kind of defaulted to her. But it's always an interesting one because you could see there was no formalized process to communicate that out. I guess more talk about just the data steward itself. And I've seen a lot of things where, responsibility is kind of why people shy away from this. And, if something goes wrong, is it the data steward's fault? Or because it becomes known as, Cesar's data set, or is it the analyst that's at fault? And I know, pretty much the truth is it's usually a little bit of both, but it's not necessarily that anyone is at fault. Some cases there are technical glitches, ETL doesn't work. But I wanted to throw that out to the group and see what everyone had to say.
So let me jump in on this, Cesar, 'cause this is something I was just about to bring up actually. But you being superhuman have clearly read my mind. But I expect nothing less from yourself with your legendary powers. I like to call it data honesty, and that's what you don't always see at companies. Two aspects to that. First of all, people can get embarrassed when their data is of bad quality, and I've seen people disguise it or shove it under the carpet or just not be honest and upfront that there's a problem to get fixed, and that just perpetuates the problem. And also data secrecy as well. I've seen areas of the same company who don't want to share data with other areas of the firm, and not for any legitimate regulatory reasons. It's just because they feel that they're giving away a secret source or for some other reason. So I've seen that quite a lot. And until you solve both of those, you can never have that true open environment where you can all work together to actually solve the problems.
I just want to pick up on a point, or maybe ask the panelists a question about data stewards. Has anyone seen data stewards working really well? And what are those data stewards actually doing?
I have. I work with some. It's an emerging role. So in those cases, it's a formal recognition by the company that there is disparity between definitions of metrics across different groups, and so the steward themselves just make sure that a panel of people, a data governance committee, as it's been called, is responsible for coming together, providing all the metric definitions and making sure that they're on the same page. It's then the steward's responsibility to make sure that that happens as the final output, but also ensuring that we source and transform the data correctly when the engineers are doing that. They don't need to know the ins and outs of the technical implementation. They just need to be able to understand the source systems, understand the final output, and verify that the data is transformed correctly.
If anyone likes the sound of that, we're actually recruiting a data steward role at Just Eat, so feel free to get in touch.
Do you want me to write you a job description?
I've already got a job description. You just sold it way better than the job description does.
But the biggest part is that they need to have the they need to have the support of the rest of the company to do that job. If they don't have support, then that role doesn't really mean
much. And I think you kind of go into a really good question is, where does governance kind of fall? Does it come top down, or does it come from kind of the analysts and the users up? And I think I know what my opinion is, but I'll throw this out to the group to see what you guys have to say.
I kind of feel that it is top down. I think that it does need to have that buy-in at an exec sponsor level to make sure that the definitions are there. You hear the anecdote where people go into a meeting and they spend the whole meeting talking about which number is actually correct. I think it's a difficult thing because I think some businesses that they want to be seen to be data-driven, but they're not actually data-driven, and they have the token data governance tick. Yeah, we have someone that does that, but they don't actually give them the resources they actually need. A lot of these sort of places that you find, there's someone doing data governance, but it might be one or two people. And I don't know how they sort of can actually make any traction within this sort of a larger organization. So I think they need to have exec buy-in. There needs to be actually a little bit of resource put behind these kind of people, because they are there and we are seeing that sort of the different sort of volumes and sources of data that there has to be some sort of controls put in place. Otherwise you do end up in the Wild West, and you do have these kind of like disagreements about what data to use. So I'd like to see that people at a higher level understand the need for it and sort of associate the right resources, but it probably doesn't happen everywhere.
I think that everyone that produces data should be owning data quality. It's just that we need to look for some specialists to come in and verify that they're doing the right things and that they have all the skills that they need.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that point because I think you have a particularly interesting model, Mark, by which I like to call it the command and control model. No, but I understand why. I don't know, I'm giving you a bit of a hard time, and but I understand why, and I do believe that it does provide, you know, those guardrails around ensuring that people have data that is safe and that they have visualizations that have been checked as well and checked thoroughly. And one thing that I would like to perhaps explore a little bit, because I know that Banoub and I, you know, way back in the day, we had perhaps more of the Wild West in our organizations in terms of how people published up. It was all about the user's responsibility to ensure that the data was correct. You know, obviously there's you know, data that's in the warehouse that they don't have a lot of control over, but when they're bringing it all together, you know, enriching it however they want to enrich it, creating the calculations, there is some burden that does sit on the end user to ensure that's correct. Now, not everything's a curated data source. Not everything gets into a Tableau data source. Shock horror, lots of people do live connections, or they also do workbook extracts to the, yeah, which I wish that they didn't, but they do. So for me, I think the way that I have always discussed that with people in my ecosystem is you've put your name on it. You know, you are the publisher, you are the one that owns it, you are the one that's responsible when there are issues that come through. How does everyone else feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, a lot of the people, if you've got the ability to publish, that you've obviously done some sort of training or you're familiar with the product, and you're also the subject matter expert, you know the data that you're playing with. You know, I've had instances where, you know, people have gone off and sourced their own data, published it onto Tableau server, and then it breaks. And then they come running back to the sort of the data team saying, fix it. And we're like, well, we don't even know where you're getting the data from, kind of thing. So yeah, if you publish it, I think you're responsible for that.
I just want to make a quick note. We've got about 14 or so minutes left, so I'm going to open up to questions to the audience too, just so that we can go through and bring in that aspect as well. But while the questions are coming in, I wanted to lob this out, and this is something that I noticed with governance. And whenever we start the governance conversation at any organization, it's funny, but it usually takes a meeting or two to realize that we're not all speaking the same language. And just terminology, words. I know every time I'd use the word extract, you know, certain people would get really twitchy. And it's because of their definition of the word extract. It's not that they knew about refreshing extracts or whatnot. But are there certain words that tend to set people off, or that you've found really for us in the Tableau community, that when you start to use them, they don't quite translate very well upwards or outwards? Ooh, I threw a really big, a really tough one out there.
I think that there's probably a number of terms that are just brand new to people when you start introducing Tableau. And like, I'm personally going through that with Alteryx, and like learning all of that kind of language. It all relates to itself. It makes sense once you're in the zone, but like it takes a little bit of getting used to. But we also had that when we all touched databases for the first time. Tables and schemas and views and columns. Yeah.
I think if you're looking for red flags there, Cesar, I think the red flags I get, I look for people's attitude as either a green or a red flag, and it's the people who will use these easy to use tools like Alteryx and Tableau and such like, and just be satisfied with just their first or second effort, and not make any attempt to self-learn, not make any attempt to learn the technology or to iterate and improve. And these tools are almost a victim of their own success in terms of their ease of use, because they make it very easy for somebody who's very ill-informed to actually get something out there. And that can sometimes be a bad thing. You should have a relatively decent base level of knowledge, and then the foresight and determination to improve on that knowledge as well. And that's where people like me and other people that run centers of excellence have to try and intercept these new people and give them that base set of knowledge. And once you give them that, you'll find they go on to some good things. It's the ones who are left unattended that tend to cause the carnage.
Yeah, so picking up on what the guys are saying, I also think that we as leaders have a responsibility to ensure that the people who are using our environments have the right knowledge to be able to use it and understand the differences. So I think data literacy is always one of my favorite topics. And, beyond giving people a license, we need actually, before we give them a license, to ensure that they have the basics in order to do a great job along the way. And that can be both on tools and understanding technology, but also understanding the data landscape. Coming back to one of the things that Mark was saying around the software development lifecycle, there's also some things that we can do around naming conventions. Now, whether those naming conventions are, actually how you name the extracts or the tables that you're persisting or the columns or what's actually going on. And if it's in a repeatable way, if people have the structure behind it, if they're trained how to do that, it's much easier for end users who may want to leverage some of the investment or the time that you've gone to prepare a curated data source. Really helps to have those good naming conventions along the way as well. So I think it goes beyond, the names of what each of the different tools are, different types of extracts or live connections or different things, but also how we're naming the data as well and tables.
I think just to add, the one probably word that really triggers me and gets me a little bit sort of scared is when people start dealing the raw data, kind of like, that sort of terminology around where it's, you don't know what they're looking at. They're pulling it from some sort of like front end and playing around with it and putting it into Tableau and sort of just bypassing all the sort of processes that have been put in place. So when people start mentioning raw data, that's where I get a little bit worried.
Is that like a salmonella type reaction to?
You start vomiting into a corner.
The other one.
Please go ahead, Mark.
The other one is when people tell me, when I ask why they did something or how they got something, and they tell me their manager told them to do it, or their senior exec told them to do it that way. There's little ownership and little understanding of what they're doing. They pretty much are just being a report monkey. I like to call it.
Yeah, goes back to attitude, like I just mentioned. It's the ones who exactly say, I've been told to replicate this in Tableau, so that's what I'm going to do. And unless my manager tells me anything else, I'm not going to do what you say. So, yeah, seen it many times.
So Emily's asking, really, how do you go and make governance not feel so heavy? And this is something I don't think we I guess we kind of covered on this in little bits and pieces. But how do you not feel so, pretty much the higher ups have told us this is what we need to do, or we're not allowed to do this, or what?
Dee has plenty of good ideas on this. She keeps telling me all the time.
Yeah, you make it fun by putting one of us in charge. That's what you do.
I can just quickly say, the guy that we have, and I know he's not watching because he's off playing darts, watching darts actually. The guy at Just Eat called Stuart, he is, he's just a generally really nice guy. He's very sort of low key. I think you need to find that right character. You need to find that right personality where they understand data. They have that a strong sort of data background, but they also have a very sort of approachable personality. And I think that right sort of mixture of a technical knowledge and the soft skills that go along with that kind of like the difficult challenge of being a data governance sort of like person. I think that's where you can get some really good success out of that. I think finding that right person.
Yeah, I think those people are really useful for being approachable and trying to be empathetic to the people that are going through their processes, because data governance is just a process at the end of the day. And in that regard, that's one side of it. The other side is be mindful of your processes. Try and make sure that people see the value first and that you clean things up second. That you're going to win a lot more friends that way than, but you can still have the enforcement later. It's the difference of where do things need to be a guideline and where do things need to be a gate for stopping people.
I've always liked the idea of guardrails when it comes to data. You know, let's keep people between these, and not necessarily the gates that you need to talk to. You know, you pretty much end up going to the very top of the organization and coming back down to get access to data that way.
I'd say that the only time that you should really look at using a gate is when you know that investment of time up front will save significant time down the line because you have continuous problems in those areas.
Any other ideas on gated data or locked away?
No, not on data. No, the data is available.
Oh,
it's how you use it and represent it.
Process. Yes, yes. Definitely a good answer there, Mark. I like that a lot. I think there's a lot of insights here today. This has been fantastic. I'm giving everyone the 5-minute mark too, so you know we got a little bit left. So you know our audience can also ask questions as it comes through. You know, Vince just sent us something where we can. How do I save this Tableau database as an Excel file? But let's see here. Oh, there's some good stuff here. Oh, well, thank you. Whoa. Oh,
yeah.
Yep.
Cesar, there's one here that's from BJ that talks about, oh, I just missed it, sorry. Let's start out with your stance. Should organizations have formalized data governance policies, and what does that look like in your opinion? I think Mark maybe touched on that a little bit, but if anybody else has any other color they want to add to that.
Oh, and that was my fault. I copied and pasted the wrong one.
Sorry.
The question from BJ was, do you see differences in approaches to data governance at companies founded pre-2000, i.e. pre-digital natives, and those founded more recently? Is it a difference in data governance and company size issue or company culture? So I can start with that. I think, so I've actually only worked at organisations that are pre-2000. Oh, goodness me, does that mean, what's that saying about me? So I haven't had the pleasure of working at a startup. I don't think so. I don't believe that there is. I think from what I've observed across the board, we're just seeing, you know, a lot of people want to talk about data governance. I'm starting to see more of it get incorporated into the fabric of an organization and how that organization actually operates. In the past, I've heard things like, well, you know, data quality, we can't, you know, data quality, or, you know, we can't get data quality to 100%. Well, too right, we can't. You know, we need to actually focus on what's really important for the organization. If we really try and get it to 100%, then I think that we'll just tie ourselves up in knots and we'll take our eye off the ball and, I don't know, maybe end up being the Kodak of the photography, you know, of the data world, and kind of burning out because we're going down a rat hole. So from my perspective, I don't believe that there's any difference between those two types of organizations. I think that it's easier for, you know, the digital natives to bring in new technology that can underpin and support it. Certainly in the older organizations, I find that it can be more difficult to actually bring new technology on board. There's more things like on-prem solutions rather than cloud, for instance. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
And quickly, so I know we got like not 2 minutes left, but I think one thing that we haven't touched on, and it's from BJ's question, which is a really good question, is around the culture. And I think one thing we haven't really discussed about, I think data governance is hard. I think there's a lot of pressure on sort of businesses and analysts and stuff to get that information out there and to, answer these questions and help the business make these decisions moving forward. And it's like taking that time to sort of do that documentation, make sure that definitions are applied and all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people they just jump straight into that question. And if they're writing code, they go straight in and they try and deliver to their stakeholders and keep them happy and all that kind of stuff. And we don't actually really sort of take that time at the end of a deliverable to sort of really write it up and say, this is the data, this is where it came from, this is how it works, and all that kind of thing. So I think that to fix that, I think is a big culture change in terms of like making sure that there's time associated with that.
Yeah, I've seen companies summarize it as making data a first-class citizen. It's not that it's something that supports us and happens in the background. It's something that we're all conscious of, and it's there and present always. And this can work in companies no matter how old or how big they are. One of the people that was talking at the Tableau Conference Europe this year was the National Trust, and that's not a pre-2000 company, that's a pre-1900 company. And they were able to modernize and start using data and move ahead. So that's not something, just because it's not a tech company doesn't mean that you can't use it.
It's a really good point. One of the chief data officers I used to work with, who's brilliant, she's retiring this year, used to say, and I think it was just a good point to kind of wrap up all of this, is Linda Powell would tell us all, she would just kind of say, it's not my data, it's not your data, it's our data. And kind of when we start looking at it from this perspective, it helps so much more in getting the data out there and across to the people who really needed it. I think we are up on time, fellas, and everyone.
Fellas?
Thank you so much.
Fellas and he.
Fantastic. This has been excellent. I know there are going to be so many people that are looking up the replay of this, and so everyone can see to just a big giant thank you to everyone, and thanks
Cesar. I just wanted to say thank you to you and Em and Alex for helping bring together TFF. I know how much work goes on behind the scenes. There's so many great speakers and great panels as well. You guys totally rocked it. It's been a pleasure being with the four fellas as well on the data governance track, and also a shout out to playfairdata.com for supporting TFF as well. Great work.
Yeah, thank you all so much. All right. Yeah. And
same time tomorrow, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you to our amazing panel. Oh my gosh, when we were talking about this, I was so excited because I'm that weird person that I like my guidelines. So it gives me something to go by, and so I appreciate that, and I love that everybody kind of just shared in and provided their wisdom. So thank you so much. We are going to roll right along. We have Mike Moore, who is joining us. Now, Mike is he has been using Tableau for quite a while, and he started out his Tableau journey by cyber stalking, but in the friendliest of ways, Dan Murray, Andy Kriebel, and Mike Christiani. And so he spoke at the 2013 Tableau conference when his company wouldn't be able to pay for him to attend, and he is now employed as a data scientist. Mike is going to share with us the art of what to leave out. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mike.